Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to get started. Welcome to this webinar. Let me start by giving you a little bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, which means that you are all muted. There are too many of you to all speak at the same time. But in your GoToWebinar control panel, there should be an area for questions. So if you have questions during this webinar, don't hesitate. Write them down in the control panel, and at the end of the webinar, we will take a look there and make sure that all of those are answered. One other point is that this is part of a webinar series, 7 or 8 different webinars about different topics. All of these webinars are recorded, and you will get these recordings on the website of the Ghent Workgroup as they are ready. So if you go to the website where you subscribed as well, on that page, you will also find links to the webinar recordings. The slides we will also make available there so that you can review those as well. Okay, so let me start by introducing your speakers for today. It's not just me, there are 2 speakers. We're actually also in different locations today. We have Elli Cloots from EFI from Belgium. I am actually in Germany at the moment. We hope that all of this will go well with internet and so on. So a very short introduction for me to begin with. My name is David. For those of you who don't know me, I started working at Enfocus as far back as 1996, worked on the Taylor product, which was a visual PostScript editor, then on Pitstop. And in 2002, and this is very relevant, of course, in this context, I helped to start the Ghent Workgroup, founded in June 2002. From Enfocus, I moved to Gradual Software. One of the products there, or our main product at that point, was Switch, product name you might also still be familiar with. And then at the moment, and as of 2008, I work at 4Ps. I'm CTO there, which means I am involved with all of the technical stuff. And 4Ps is a value-added distributor of various pieces of software, including, for example, Callus Software, and I'm talking to you from the offices of Callus Software at the moment.
Hi, my name is Elli Cloots. As David already said, I'll be your speaker for today as well. Actually, I have a very similar background as David. Started working at Enfocus in 2000. Also very early on involved in the Ghent Workgroup, became a technical officer of the Ghent Workgroup at a certain point in time, and later on became the vice chair, which I am still today. Moved from Enfocus to Gradual Software as well, and became the director of professional services there, supporting the Switch product line. Today, I am Senior Product Marketing Manager at EFI, and my main focus is on the Fiery Digital front end, but I also have a background in the Web2Print solutions and the ERP MIS solutions. Now, before we get started on the large format specification itself, let us give you a little bit of background on the Ghent Workgroup. The Ghent Workgroup has a mission in life, of course, and that is to really create best practices and specifications that make the graphic arts industry better and easier. 2 different ways of approaching that. One is the specifications as we're developing one on large format printing, but we also already have a number of specifications that have been existing for quite a number of years. Those come with rules of this you can do, this you shouldn't be doing, and those requirements are captured in specifications and application settings. We also have best practices, how best to do something. It's not that it's wrong if you do it differently, but it might make your life a lot easier if you do it according to some of the descriptions that we have captured in white papers. We also develop tools like the output the output suite, and that is really to test your workflow to see if you've got certain problem areas where maybe you need to enable different settings in your workflow. All of that together is available for free on the Ghent Workgroup website. We are an association, and all of the work we share with the graphic arts industry free of charge. So you can always go to our website and download any of these items.
So let's talk about our specifications in a little bit more detail, because we are going to talk about one specific specification today. And what you see here is a slide that we've used quite a bit over the last 10 to 15 years in different forms. And what it depicts is standards and standards. And when we start at the left, the base standard that all of our work and a lot of the standardization in print is based on is PDF. And PDF is an ISO standard. 32,000 is its ISO number, and that forms the basis of a lot of other standards that are being used today. The most important one, probably PDFX, which is a layer on top of PDF, also an ISO standard, and PDFX is a standard for the complete graphic arts industry. That is important because it means that some things cannot be checked in PDFX. If you have a standard for the complete graphic arts industry, then you can't do resolution checking because there are so many differences between different products in our industry. But that is the base standard for graphic arts. What the Ghent Workgroup has done from the very start is build on top of that PDFX standard. So the Ghent Workgroup develops specifications, but all of these specifications are PDFX compliant, which means that if you create a file that is compliant with one of the Ghent Workgroup specifications, you automatically also create a file that is compliant with a PDFX standard. And then, of course, if you are a printer or publisher, it is absolutely okay to take one of these Ghent Workgroup specifications and then add your own additional restrictions or requirements to that. And that gives this concept of dolls within dolls that you see here on this slide, where each of these standards or specifications builds on top of the base specification. What is key for the Ghent Workgroup, like I said, they are all based on PDFX, but as I explained, they are more targeted than PDFX. The older specifications that we create are based on PDFX 1A. What is important to remember there is that that means that all transparency has to be flattened and that it only supports CMYK and spot color. The newer specifications are built on top of PDFX4, and PDFX4 supports live transparency, no flattening is necessary, and it also creates room to use additional color spaces like calibrated RGB, so RGB with an ICC profile attached. The Ghent Workgroup specifications, and that is another very important point, come in variants. While there is only one PDFX standard, the Ghent Workgroup offers a whole range of specifications for different market segments, use cases, or printing technologies.
Now, if we look at the current variants that are available by Ghent Workgroup, we call them currently the 2015 specification, and the variants that we cover in that cover ad delivery, both for magazines and for newspapers. We've got offset specifications or variants that cover sheet fed and web offset. both for CMYK plus spot color only workflows, but also for workflows that do allow RGB images. We've got variants for packaging. So if we look at what we covered today, there clearly are a number of areas missing. Now, we also asked the industry what they thought were missing. We asked you what you thought was missing. We did a survey a couple of years back to see what other focus areas we should cover. And we didn't only ask this, of course, but one of the areas that came out was definitely digital print. That was answered a lot, and we already covered a webinar on digital print, small format printing earlier in this series, and the recording is available on the Ghent Workgroup website if you missed that one. But another area that came out that we didn't have any specification for was large format printing. So with that, of course, it wasn't a real surprise, but before we really start investing a lot of time and effort from all of these industry experts that are part of the Ghent Workgroup, we wanted to make sure that this should be an area to focus on where we can help the industry. So we got started, we started working on a large format print variant based on the 2015 specification. Now, quickly, we covered or discovered quite a number of challenges that are very unique to this market segment. With digital print cut sheet, when we developed that specification, it was more about making the rules a little looser and not failing files that quickly that would print correctly on a cut sheet machine. But with large format printing, we did need to cover a number of challenges that are very unique to that segment. As you know better than I do, we cover from a pop-up banner to beach flags to big billboards to car covers to building covers. It really is a big variation in types of print that are covered. So if we look at that, it's not just the job itself that is different, but also the technologies used, the materials used. If it's inside or outside, requires different things with regards to inks. Duration, will the color fade too fast? A lot of those type of things need to be taken into account. And then also resolution requirements are different. And there we saw that none of our current requirements or current specifications could be used in the large format industries because these files get to be created in a completely different way. The delivery of the PDF files is also different. We've got different types of file, different dimensions of files. Sometimes they're even too big for PDF. The PDF restriction of the file size or the file dimensions that are covered just don't cover all of the types of jobs you can have in large format. So very often jobs are created at scale. We have here a few examples of most common scales we encountered. But of course, if you deliver a file at scale, that means maybe it will be blown up by 2 times or by 10 times or by 48 times. And we need to take that into account when putting requirements into place for images, for text, for line art, and so on.
So what is unique to this large format specification as we're developing it, and that you don't find in any of the previous specifications that we've created for other market segments, is that we introduced a concept of variables to deal with this diversity that we have in large formats. As Elli explained, the products in this market segments are so widely different that you cannot, for example, cover the whole market segment and say we need this resolution. The resolution needs to be based on something, on a characteristic of the product. And that is exactly what we mean with variables. In this large format specification, we are building on two variables. The first one is viewing distance, and the second one is scaling factor. To go into a little bit more detail, let's start with viewing distance. Viewing distance is the distance between, or the average distance between someone looking at the final product and the final product itself. And so it is what you see on this picture. If I'm walking a trade show or I'm in a meeting room and there are roll-up banners that are there somewhere, how far am I normally going to be on average from that printed product? Because that determines how high the resolution needs to be, for example, so that it still looks nice to us. And viewing distances in large formats can vary wildly between different products. You see some examples there. A banner, you can assume that there is a viewing distance that is a couple of meters on average. That is probably not going to be the case for a car wrap. You're probably usually a little bit further away. It's certainly not the case for a billboard that you see at the side of a highway, where you only see that from a very long distance, and then on top of that, you're usually in a moving car. So again, that has influences on what the quality of the images needs to be that you use on that material. If I print a leaflet and I know that people are going to examine that from close range, then my resolution is going to be relatively high that I need. If I'm printing a highway billboard and I know that people are going to be driving by that billboard at speed and they're only going to see it from quite a distance, then I probably don't need that much resolution in my images, and they will still look okay to the people that see them. So this viewing distance is the first of these two variables that we are using in our specification so that we can make one specification but still diversify how different products in this market segment are going to be handled.
A second variable is the scaling factor, especially because of the limitation in PDF and how big of a file you can really design. Designs are created at scale, and that needs to be taken into account as well, because there's a big difference, of course, if you've got a resolution of an image of 300 dpi and you're going to scale it by multiplying it by 2, or you're going to scale it up 10 times. So we need to take that scaling factor into account as well, and that's again defined by the type of job. If it's a big billboard, it will be scaled up a lot more than, for example, the pop-up banner would be at no scale or at 1. Or if it's a building that gets wrapped, it might even be scaled up a little bit more than the big billboard that you see on the slide. Now, as an example, you could have a design delivered from 20 centimeter by 50 centimeter as a PDF file, while this billboard would be 2 meters by 5 meters. So 200 centimeters that needs to be the final product, but that is designed as 20 centimeters means it's a scaling factor of 10. And that 10 we'll use as a variable also in our specification to determine what the real value is that we need to check against, for example, for resolution. We didn't see a real standard in the market for scaling factors. It depends a lot on the printer of what they use. There's a lot of communication also about I created this file at that scaling factor and that needs to go to the printer. We do want to streamline it a little bit so that there is less confusion or less mistakes that can be made against it. But yeah, we're trying to come up with something that's adaptable, independent of whatever workflow you use and which scaling factors you normally use within your print plant already. So most commonly we saw multiple 2, 10, 48 being used. So we accommodate those definitely. And then we see those having effect on the resolution as already explained, but also text size restrictions and line width restrictions. Because for example, if you're designing something at 1/10, maybe the text is only 1 or 2 points large. That could mean that the file fails a pre-flight step because it's too small of a text to print. But then if you're going to scale it up by 10, then that's no longer a problem. So we shouldn't be failing a file like that. So we're also accommodating that scaling factor into other requirements within the specification. So here's an example both on text and on image resolution that takes the both of the variables into account. So let's say that for small text, the requirement is it needs to be 8 points minimum to be able to print it correctly. Then if we take a viewing distance of 2 meters into account and a scaling factor of 4, and we use 4 here to make the calculation even, then the corrected value or the value that will actually check against will be 2 points. And even though that sounds really small for text and almost unreadable, it's because the scaling factor will still blow up the text that you can check on 2 points in the designed file. Then for the resolution or the images, we will use the same viewing distance, the same scaling factor, but normally you would need to have a 100 ppi points per inch. Otherwise it will fail because it will be not high enough to be able to print the file and make it look correctly. In the corrected value, we will demand 200 ppi because the image will still be blown up, and otherwise you would end up with only 50 ppi in the end result, which would be too low for this example because you would only be at a viewing distance of 2 meters. So you would see it's too low as a resolution. Now, all of that was around these two variables, and these two variables are used throughout the specification with regards to different variants, so that will, different requirements, I should say. So that will come back in certain requirements, but just as a concept, we wanted to explain that first, so you already understand that the real value that is in the specification will be influenced by both of these variables. Now, like David already explained, all of our specifications are based on PDFX. And for the large format specification for the 2015, even as a whole, we use PDFX 4 2010 as the base. So that already includes a lot of checks with regards to, is a file printable, not specific to large format, not specific to offset or whatever print process will happen, but just in general, will it be printable? So it automatically excludes things like video or annotations, etc. As said, PDFX 4 includes transparency support and layer support. So that's things that, especially transparency support, wasn't included in PDFX 1A. But for the base for large format printing, we wanted to have support for transparencies. There's an example here. Drop shadow is just one of the many transparency possibilities or transparency effects that you can include in a PDF file. There's already requirements for fonts built into PDFX 4. They have to be in there. They have to be embedded. You can choose if you subset them or completely embed them. Both have advantages and disadvantages, but you can have them in the file, or you have to have them in the file and available whenever you want to print it. And then there's overall document quality, security checkings, and there's a lot of other requirements to just make sure that you've got a real PDF document that can be printed and interpreted.
So next up, there is a bunch of requirements in this new specification that have to do with the document itself and with the pages in the document. First of all, there is a requirement that, and this sounds technical, that the crawl box is the same as the media box. The media box is actually the biggest surface you have in a PDF document. The crawl box is what is visible inside of Adobe Acrobat, for example. And the specification says that those two have to be the same, so that if you process a document through a RIP, regardless of the RIP you're using, you always see in Acrobat what is actually also going to be printed, so you have no surprises. And this is the guiding principle, of course, of PDFX. Also, the guiding principle of all of the Ghent Workgroup specifications is to reduce surprises as you print jobs. Page scaling, there is something in the PDF format that already allows to indicate that pages should be scaled. This is very similar to the variable concept that we use here in our new specifications. Unfortunately, that page scaling isn't used very much because there are not really creation applications that allow you to say that. So if you use Illustrator to design something and you design it at 1/10 of the final size, Illustrator has no way to let you set in this Illustrator file that you have done this design at a 1/10 scale. Still, that possibility is there in PDF, and we decided that it would be a good idea to warn people if they process a file that has that flag set, so that you know that the file might be scaled up or down in the RIP. There is a warning for empty pages. This is one of those requirements that differs quite a bit between different specifications. If you're printing a book, having empty pages is nothing special, but I think that you'll agree with me that if you're printing banners and the file that comes in is completely empty, that's probably something went wrong in that case. So at least you get a warning when pages are completely empty in this specification for large format as well. And then there is a concept called layers. The technical name for that is optional content if you talk about PDF. And those layers can be switched on or off. A layer that is off is hidden, so it's normally not visible in Adobe Acrobat, for example. Again, if you print it on certain RIPs or you process it through certain types of software, it might be that they misinterpret these hidden layers and that they show up in the end result anyway. And that's, of course, something that you want to know. So we included a warning for that possibility as well. And then there is another always complicated topic, and that is color. Which color spaces do you allow for particular jobs? In most of the Ghent Workgroup specifications, the older ones, we allowed only CMYK and spot color. In the newer ones, like the 2015 specifications, we allow spot color, CMYK, but then also calibrated color spaces like RGB with an ICC profile attached, or LAB for images, not for other elements, but only for images. These large format specifications that we're talking about here even go a little bit further. What you see there is an overview of what color spaces are allowed for images. Pretty much anything, and then what color spaces are allowed for, it's called here non-images, that would then be text and vector elements. And for text and vector elements, it's a little bit less because, of course, you want to avoid having things that are incorrectly re-separated in the printing process. The color space support here is pretty wide because you're dealing with a very diverse market with very diverse printing technologies, and where typically you have devices that have a very big gamut or color space that they can print, and allowing many color spaces in the input file also allows you to take advantage of that big gamut you have on certain output devices. What is always the case is that the output intent of the PDF has to contain a CMYK ICC profile. So that means that we're always still assuming in the specification that the final output device is going to be a CMYK output device. And along the same lines, the blend color space that you have in the PDF document, and blend color space is the color space where transparency is resolved. It's a very technical issue, but if you have transparency in a file, you need to calculate what the final color is going to be, and the final color is going to be a blend of the colors of different elements that overlap with each other. And to calculate that blend, well, you need to know in which color space you're going to do that. And depending on what your choice there is, you could get incorrect results or unpredictable results. So in this Ghent Workgroup specification, the blend color space, just as the output intent color space, has to be CMYK.
Then we also have some requirements around resolution, as already mentioned. All of our specifications have specific requirements for the resolution that apply to that printing process. For large format printing, for grayscale and color images, we give an error the moment you go below 240 ppi. If you have a file that has images below 300 ppi, we'll give a warning, because from our experience and from the feedback we got from the group that discussed the specification, was that you could go as low as 240 ppi before it really becomes a problem and before it really becomes visible. Of course, you also have these super high resolution files, but those are then specific files or specific jobs that need a specific way of handling, and then you can always demand to have a higher resolution. For 1-bit images, we also have requirements in there where we demand more, because there you immediately see more pixelated results once you go to lower resolutions. Now, these requirements will always take into account both the scaling factor and the viewing distance. So the further you're away from whatever you're printing, the lower the resolution can be. And the more you will blow up the file, the more you will scale it up, the higher the resolution will need to be.
I think maybe this is an important point to just reinforce. The numbers you see here, to some of you, might seem very high, and it might seem like we made a terrible mistake here. Of course, that has to do with the fact that viewing distance has to be calculated here. So if you would look at what actually gets checked for a billboard, for example, you will see that the actual resolution that you require is much lower than what you have on here. If you take the variables into account and you look at the common guidelines that you can find on the internet today for people that have submission guidelines on their website for different products, for example, you'll see that this is actually very much in line with common practices today.
And then the specification also includes a number of requirements around overprint and readability, because that's really what it comes down to. So one is, for example, around white objects. If white objects are on a colored background and they're set to overprint, they could disappear like this. So you'll see that if that gets then ripped, the white object can disappear because it's set to overprint, and white on top of a color would just not be there anymore. So we'll always make sure that anything that is pure white, and there is a definition in the specification on what white really is, that will always need to be set to knockout. We don't do any checks on misregistration for small objects. That is part of the offset specifications, because there, if you have really small black text, for example, and it knocks out and it doesn't overprint, you could have the little white line going around that text with the misregistration happening. We don't see issues like that within the large format specification or within large format practices, and therefore we didn't put those into the specification today. Minimum printable point size is part of that. I put in between brackets printable because it's not about readability or the design. We're not checking that. We're just checking if it's technically printable, if the machine will be able to print text as small as this size. For regular text, it's 5 points. For rich black text, that means that it's text that is printed out of more than one color, just not only the black is used as an ink, but you'll also be using, for example, cyan or magenta underneath the black text, and then you could have a little bit of ink coming from underneath. So in offset, a real problem. In a large format, we just kept both of the requirements on the same point size. And the same for thin lines. If a line becomes very, very thin, it could become not a very straight line anymore, and you could have pixels missing there. And therefore, we've got a minimum line width of 0.15. It's all based also on feedback we got from the market. If you've got certain feedback that you want to share with us, you can always do that. Then another big part of checking that we have in other specifications, but that we excluded for large format printing, is ink coverage. Because normally the PDF will go to a RIP that drives the printer, and that RIP will automatically make sure that whatever comes out and data that is sent to the printer is an ink coverage that can be handled by that printer. So that's why we didn't include any specific ink coverage settings, because normally you don't have the typical problems of paper sticking inside the press like you would have in an offset over a web offset press.
Okay, so those are the major points that are in this new specification. Of course, there are certainly also smaller requirements or things that are included, but we wanted to give you an overview of the main things. Let me maybe stress as well that all of this may sound relatively technical. Of course, this is the job of companies who create PDF files or who make software to check PDF files, to implement all of this into something that is easy to use. So you have the background on why certain things are there and what the decision process was. It is up to the software vendors afterwards to make sure that you don't have to worry about these concepts like variables and so on. You will simply have a nice pre-flight profile, for example, where you can choose what the product is that you have, and then everything else will be calculated based on that. But let's talk about where we are with this specification. Elli talked about the small format digital specification, so what is officially called digital print specification. That one has been released, and mainly because it is a relatively straightforward specification where yeah, we mostly relaxed some of the rules that you have in sheet fed offset, because digital print is a little bit easier in some respects. With a large format print specification, we are running a little bit behind, and that is because mostly the fact that we have this variable concept, but also because of the diversity of the market. So what we have at the moment is a beta specification, so a nice technical document with all the rules and so on. We also have beta pre-flight profiles for Callus PDF Toolbox and Focus PitStop. And those implement this variable concept and all of the other rules that we talked about. What we need is more testing and more people who want to do those tests. We believe that with the current implementation that we have in these pre-flight profiles, for example, we should have something that will be a very nice base for people to use in quality control in their workflow, but this has definitely not been tested to the point where we feel comfortable in releasing it tomorrow. The second thing that would be really great if you are in large format is some feedback on the concepts that we've told you about. We make decisions. I'll take ink coverage as an example. We've made the decision that we are not going to have a check on ink coverage because, as Elli explained, the RIP is supposed to handle this. And the RIP is probably better at that than any arbitrary restriction we could put on ink coverage during quality control. Of course, the question with these kinds of decisions is always, is that the correct decision? Are there perhaps markets where this is not the case? Is this something that we cannot decide for the whole of the large format printing market because there are exceptions? That's the kind of feedback that would be really great to get from people. And while we have some people who understand large formats, both from the user side and from the vendor side in the Ghent Workgroup itself, it is certainly something where we could use some additional help from outside. So what more can you get from us, and where to go from here? If you have not done that, you should really go to the Ghent Workgroup website. As explained at the beginning, everything that we do is freely available, and most of it is available from the Ghent Workgroup website. And what market segment you may be in is not that important. I'm pretty confident that you'll find some information on there that is useful. There is a whole range of white papers on the website, and I've listed a couple here, but there are definitely a lot more that are interesting. Something about best practices around transparency handling, for example. And there's a very nice document about the principles behind the Ghent Workgroup 2015 specifications and how they should be used in a workflow. That also talks about a lot more detail on color spaces and what the result is of the choices you make there. There is a white paper about PDF file aggregation. So how do you take multiple documents together to form a final document, and then what are the consequences of that, and how can you streamline that? So there's lots of really good content. Some of it is a little bit more technical. Some of it is actually written to be understandable for well, people who are not necessarily color geeks or PDF geeks. I also want to point out Ghent Output Suite. The Output Suite is a set of PDF patches, so small PDF files that are designed to be printed, for example, on a particular output device. and that in a very visual way will show whether that output device does a good job. There are many output devices that have problems with decent overprint handling, for example, and in many cases it's not really even that the device cannot do it, it's simply that the default configuration of this output device itself, or of the RIP or the DFE, that the default configuration is not good. And the output suite is designed to quickly show you where you have troubles in the handling of PDF documents. Again, a free tool, easy to use, but a real time saver if you're trying to figure out whether your workflow or your output devices are compatible with with modern PDF documents, basically. Then you have application settings where you can download settings for creative applications such as Quark Express or Adobe InDesign or Adobe Illustrator, but also pre-flight profiles for Adobe Acrobat or Focus Pitstop or Callas PDF Toolbox. And you have the ability also on the website to subscribe to a Ghent Workgroup newsletter. And the newsletter will point out things like new webinars that are being scheduled or new documentation that appears, and so on and so on. So also a useful thing to subscribe to that. This is a webinar, as you might have noticed. There are many more webinars that we have given in our life at the Ghent Workgroup. You will find recordings of those webinars on the Ghent Workgroup website itself, but also on the YouTube channel for the Ghent Workgroup. Some of the webinars in this particular series are already concluded, and for those you can find the recordings online. There are 3 more webinars still to come. The first one of that is on May 29th. You can see the topics there. Please go to the Ghent Workgroup website, and on the same page you subscribed for this one, you'll also have the opportunity to subscribe to all the upcoming webinars. If you think that something is missing and there is something that you would really like to see as a webinar, don't hesitate, send us an email and we will be very happy to take that up.
Yes, so we're ready for some conclusions. Before I go into that, please submit your questions through the question window on the GoToWebinar panel. We'll definitely still make some time at the end to answer your questions. If we don't get through the questions, then we'll follow up at a later stage as well. Now, what did we discuss here? We're working on a dedicated specification for large format printing. It's not published yet. We still are working on that, but we gave you an overview of all of the requirements that are on the table today, plus also the approach with variables where we take into account the viewing distance and the scaling factor. The target is the complete large format print segment. Maybe there's exceptions or very specific files or jobs that will not be covered by our specification, but the goal of all of our specifications is really to cover the bulk of it. Then again, the Ghent Workgroup output suite is definitely relevant for this market as well. You can test your workflow with that. It's also shared with the most common players in the market, so they can download it for free from our website and test their software with that output suite as well. And if you want to or can help us with testing the specification, then please get in contact. We will be sharing our contact details in just a few slides. So there you see our contact details. If you do want to help us out and share your expertise with the Ghent Workgroup, you can get in contact with David or myself at any time.
Okay, so I can see one question that has been asked already, so let's answer that. If there is anyone else who wants to ask questions, then just write that in the control panel. The question here is about resolution, image resolution, and whether we can explain what formula has been used, if there is one, to calculate resolution in relation to viewing distance. I would need to look at the actual specification to show you the formula. We can definitely send you the specification so that you can take a look at that. The goal of the formula, there is a relatively simple formula that is used. The goal of this formula was to have results for different products that are very much in correspondence with what is being used in the industry today. And I think if you run this formula on for different products, so if you would see what happens for a banner or for a car wrap or a billboard or a building wrap, then the resulting resolution that is going to be checked against will be very much in line with common guidelines that you find for these products today. Nevertheless, remember the point where we said that we value feedback on these things. This is definitely also a point where your feedback would be appreciated. If you test one of these beta profiles, for example, and those two we can easily make available to you. If you test one of these beta profiles and you see behavior that you think is not appropriate for a particular product, then we would very much like to know about that.
So I just opened the specification quickly. The formula that we're using is that final resolution, so that's the one we check against, is calculated by the variant resolution. So that's the resolution that I mentioned on the slide for image resolution, for example. So it is the variant resolution divided by the viewing distance, and the result of that is multiplied by the scaling factor. And we did try that out on a number of typical jobs that you would see in the large format industry. And like David already explained, it did end up with requirements from a number of print providers and what they require as a minimum resolution when submitting jobs to them. I hope.
Yeah, so and that is the formula that was used here for this table that you're seeing. So if you take this 100 and you divide that by 2 and then you multiply by 4, you end up with an actual resolution that you're checking that would be 200 ppi. And for a banner, for example, typically the viewing distance would be something like 2 meters. So if a banner would be delivered at full scale, so with a scaling factor here that is 1, then the resolution that would be checked would be 50. And of course, for billboards, it would be even smaller and potentially a lot smaller than that. If you do this for different products, like Elli says, we believe that this ends up with very reasonable values. There would be other ways of handling this, things like lookup tables and so on, or making different variants for different products in large formats, but we specifically did not want to do that. We wanted to create one specification for large formats and then play with these variables to allow you to test different products correctly. If we would make a different specification for banners and a specific one for car wraps and a specific one for billboards, that becomes unmanageable and people would not find their way in something like that. If you have questions for things that we weren't talking about, but they are still about the Ghent Workgroup, just send us an email as well, and we'll forward that to the correct person within the group. If you are jumping up and down to participate in some way, we would very much welcome that as well. Just send us an email and we'll tell you how you can help and what the possibilities are. Okay, then thank you very much for joining. I am sure many of you will be coming back for the next couple of webinars in this series. I hope this was useful content. If you want to play with these beta profiles or you want to look at the specification in more detail, get in contact. And all that rests me then is to wish you a very nice rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.